I'm Sai, and I want to welcome you to another Deconstruct conversation. We have a tremendous guest today. Likewise, very quick introductions about myself and a little bit of background on the guest here in a minute before I introduce Rob Phaal into the conversation. I am a transformation and change focused practitioner, if you will, and consultant and coach, a partner with organizations to really help them calibrate their business models and operating models to maximize their impact. I look at myself as a catalyst or an alchemist, if you will, helping folks really embrace the sacred triad of reality, human nature, and identity to ensure their aliveness and through their awareness, maximize that impact. Very, very openly, I'm a huge, huge fan and a huge practitioner and know the value of the wisdom that Rob is going to be sharing with us. Ever so briefly, he comes from the Department of Engineering at the University of Cambridge, focused on researching the application of engineering principles and methods really around management and organizational challenges in every spectrum, from high-tech, innovation, strategy, a tremendous, tremendous background and wisdom that he brings forward. The power of road mapping, I cannot, if you will, emphasize enough the flexibility, the use, the innovation, the strategy, all of those good things in tech business to create alignment and communications and really to begin to address some of our major fundamental challenges. With all due respect, if you will, to all parties, as I like to talk with folks and they say, we get road mapping. I ask them, if you haven't really encountered Robert Phaal's work and his brilliant foundational forward push for us as practitioners, then you really haven't gotten into road mapping. With not much more to say, Rob, welcome into the conversation. A pleasure.
Thanks very much for your kind introduction.
You're
pleased to be here.
You're tremendous, my good friend. Your work is absolutely tremendous. My good friend, kicking us off, who is Rob? Help the world really understand.
Sure. A brief introduction to my background and research interests over the last 20 years. And maybe I'll just kick off after that with a brief overview of road mapping, because it has many different flavors and not generally taught in business schools. So people often struggle to find the underlying method, really. So I'm a mechanical engineer originally, and I did my PhD in computational mechanics quite some time ago, late 80s. And then I worked in a technical consulting and research organization focusing on structural integrity. So fracture and fatigue of critical structures such as pressure vessels, pipelines, oil rigs, you name it. And I was looking for something else to do. I never had an academic career in mind at all. And still don't really think of myself as an academic, but I spotted a little advert in the local paper for a one-year secondment to the Institute for Manufacturing, which is the industrial engineering group in Cambridge, on technology management. And I thought, what's that? That sounds interesting. I work with technology, but how do you manage it? And I stayed. So 25 years later, what really appealed to me was the applied nature of the research. The approach is that industry is your laboratory, and then you're hacking academia. And I found always, if you're really interested in problem solving, you can write great papers and you have a high impact. And the other aspect that intrigued me and still does, the longest term research interest really, is as an engineer, I like tools. Instead of spanners and hammers, management tools have great utility. But sitting behind a good management tool is some coherent conceptualization. You can call that theory if you like. And through the application of tools to solve problems in a great variety of contexts, you can establish the general form and the principles for configuring it to any particular situation. And interested in all sorts of tools and management frameworks for innovation and technology management, but road mapping has a special role in the toolkit. And it's been a long-term interest and still plenty to do on this particular method. So maybe just to get everyone on the same page, I've got a couple of slides here. So in essence, what roadmaps are structured visualizations of strategic information. It's really a service to other business processes such as strategy and innovation. Its main function is to integrate the knowledge in a very holistic way. So a classic sort of structure here, we have the time axis along the top, and that's a critical feature of road mapping. It has to have time. And then a number of perspectives that are important, and these are typical for business applications. So we have at the top there market environment and high-level business context and strategy. In the middle, the value-adding tangible product, services, that kind of thing. What kind of functionality and performance? And then technology and other research sources at the bottom. And you can think of it really like everyone in the organization, and this is a scalable technique, so it can be whole sectors as well, as a piece of the jigsaw puzzle, right? And they understand their piece well and may not be aware of the other pieces. They may over magnify the size of their piece, but basically the roadmap is the picture on the puzzle box, and it's pretty hard to create that puzzle if you haven't got that picture. I've just used a sketch because roadmaps can be quite polished and it can be somewhat static, and the real power of them is when they're actively and dynamically used to support strategic discussions in the organization, decision making, and insight generation. And that's often a bit hidden from the sort of rather polished forms, and you can actually iterate very fast. So it's suitable for agile applications as well. When you realize that it is about the people and the process, next slide. What it can look like, and you never see in the roadmaps themselves, is people having conversations using the roadmap structure. And really simple technology like paper and pens and post-it notes are incredibly effective for these conversations. It seems to reduce and eliminate conflict that's inherently associated with communication in these complex situations. This particular picture happens to be a IT director having a discussion with her team, and in other rooms there was a manufacturing director and so forth, and it all gets pulled together into an overall business roadmap. So I think those two pictures at least are our take on road mapping, which is a little bit hard to find because it's not in the mainstream education and books.
Excellent. Rob, thank you so much for that broad, if you will, overview. And I think you hit upon so many critical aspects. It's and I love the way you describe it. To quote you, if you will, it's a simple, generic conceptual framework that underlies so much. A few sort of thoughts come to mind. Definitively, through conversations, it's integrative from multiple perspectives, as you described. It reveals insights through the tensions of conflict. So there's tremendous value that propels us, and it helps us in making decisions to leverage those insights. The broad question, if you will, that I'll start off with is, have we seen enough adoption from your vantage point? Not enough adoption? What are some of the challenges? But just the adoption and the embracement of this tremendous tool.
Yeah, no, that's a really important and interesting point. That road mapping, because it's not been in the mainstream business research and teaching, many people who ought to know about it don't know about it. And I think it's due to the history. The origins of this technique actually go back, as far as we can tell, to the 1960s in US high-tech sectors, aerospace, semiconductors, energy systems. And it's commonly called technology road mapping because they needed organized methods to deal with the complex engineered products. And but even for technology-focused road mapping, you need to bring in the application and sort of use context, the benefits and the market and so on. So it's always been a multifaceted technique, but it's pretty hard to get the commercial groups to come along to a workshop if you invite them to a technology road mapping workshop. So I think it's sort of not dealt with by business schools because of that assumed technological focus. But it's an entirely generic method that can be applied, I believe, and to any strategic context. And I've got quite a lot of confidence with that because that's been the primary motivation for research cases, just bring something new. And over many applications, we've established a general form, which I'll come to just in a second. But the other interesting feature, I think, I've seen a graph from the Boston Consulting Group in a book published in 2015, which showed the proliferation of strategy tools from origins in that same era in the 1960s, where people got serious about organizing their management, there's been an explosion of methods, and it's immensely confusing. This is really because you get ahead in academia and consulting to have a nice, shiny new tool. Yeah. Road mapping's never got into the airport bookshelves, right? So it's like on a slow burn, I think. I think it's got a long way to go as people become aware of it. And you need to take the technology out to make it more palatable. And so the general structure, which is a universal, is rather simple. There's a little consulting framework called the 5 W's and the H, or that goes back to a Rudyard Kipling poem called The Six Wise Men, 6 fundamental questions that are universal. And we've even found a Latin quote from the 15th century with the same. And I'm guessing throughout humanity, they've been trying to address fundamental questions, which are, when, why, what, how, who, and where. Now, 4 of those questions are baked into the structure of the roadmap. So you've got when is the time dimension, which allows you to establish your desired future state, where you are, and plot pathways to cross the gap. And then those 3 layers on that sketch. The top is really addressing the why question. Why do we need to act? What's the issue and problems we're trying to address? What are the benefits? The how, the what is the very tangible middle. What kind of products or services, what functionality, what performance do we need to achieve to address those why questions? And technology and other resources are the how at the bottom there. The 2 other fundamental questions, which are really important, aren't as explicit, but the next slide, people, well, they're your who, and location, of course, matters. Who's going to do things where? And so the process of road mapping is often regarded to be more important than the product of the roadmap because of this, which is a bit invisible in terms of the system. So that generic framework, if I'm ever confronted with a novel application, is what I reach for. I start throwing data at it relevant to the problem, and you can start to organize and structure the knowledge. It's a knowledge integrator. And this technique, why it's so important, is it's the missing link, if you like, in strategy, is a knowledge integrator. People always have to integrate things in 2 ways, I think. One is a process integration. So you need activities to synchronize over time, and that's ubiquitous. People have processes, stage gates, decision points. But the knowledge needs to integrate around those decision points. And this is the only tool. You can call it road mapping or not. It's a dynamic systems framework. The whole system is represented on the left with sublayers that can allow you to tune the granularity to just enough for what it's needed to, set against time. And so there is no other framework that just has those fundamental dynamic systems organizational ability. And the interesting thing in terms of integrating toolkits, because all tools have strengths and weaknesses. We've mentioned integration and communication as being key features of and strengths of road mapping, but it's pretty weak analytically. So any other tool and framework I've ever seen, you can understand better when you position it on this canvas. Mm-hmm. And any question mark that arises, you'll find no shortage of specialized tools that can help unpick that question mark. So the simplest toolkit configuration is to use the roadmap as an integrating knowledge hub. And then you basically flush out the questions using other tools to improve the quality of the information and therefore confidence of the decisions.
Beautiful, beautiful. And I have to tell you, Rob, there isn't a client that I've worked with, and I've been doing this for 40 plus years, quite honestly, once they get introduced to the power of road mapping, they say, how did we live without it? And this gets me to sort of my second question. One of the key things that, and I'll just make a statement and definitively ask the question and seek your wisdom. I'm very keen to push them not to over polish it prematurely, because that's where a lot of the magic happens, is what I've experienced. But definitively, your insights are, the question I ask is, are people trying to make it too polished too quickly, too soon, and then lose some of the magic?
I think so. There is a great benefit for having polished roadmaps for communicating outward from the team. But the best roadmaps I've seen are left in a rather messy state on the wall. There are visual management rooms, and particularly I've seen in Sweden, lean innovation, they call it. They have a pulse room. In a factory, they have visual management boards. If you can't see it, you can't manage it. And they're live documents, right? They're right in the middle of the workspace. And they've taken that out into the program management offices, and they use whiteboards, magnets, post-it notes. And I've watched one operate, a very disciplined process, but they are very anti-technology in that room because it can very easily get in the way of the human conversation. And so the only technology they did have was an atomic clock because they were very disciplined. And they had a high definition video conferencing device so that other teams around the world, it was quite a big firm, could control the camera and zoom in on the conversations. And they had a perspex box in the middle of the room for lost post-it notes. And they fix them. And I think that is a pathway towards scaling up that maintains this the benefits of the human conversation. And then if they wanted to communicate to suppliers, they would probably create a nice looking roadmap to have that conversation. When I talk to companies about the deployment of visual management rooms here of that type, it's very uncommon. And what they normally say is, we've got no space. Yeah. So I said, is your strategy worth less than paint? Because you seem to have a lot of walls, but it's meeting rooms, the bottleneck that is meeting rooms. And so I think, I would like to, if we talk about the future later on, maybe it's about blending digital and human. And during COVID, of course, those processes didn't work, and you can use digital whiteboards that can emulate to an extent these processes and maybe reduce the need to get together quite a lot. But in the future, I think you'll be able to have a digital wallpaper. It's getting really cheap. So you'll be able to switch on your visual management system in the meeting room, and that would remove that excuse for not approaching part of their system in this way.
Very, very well said. And exactly to your point, with a lot of the clients I've worked with, literally we'll post it outside of the CEO's office. So the visibility is tremendous at that point. And the collaboration that can happen really spans respectfully the hierarchy of the organization as we work toward common objectives and reveal where they're not common, if you will.
Exactly, yeah. I remember in the early, I've been around for a while, and I've spoken to companies who were early adopters, and Lucent Technologies in the 1990s was, and there they said they were, if you could get to the state where the natural place you go to have a strategic conversation, that's really a high level of maturity, and they call it culture-driven road mapping. Then you don't have to force it; it just makes things easier, makes things more efficient and more effective. The one just challenge, I think, why people sometimes do struggle with the technique is it's easy to confuse your roadmap with the thing it's looking at, the strategy. And then people say road mapping has brought all these complications. No, it's revealed them in your system. A guy at Philips Semiconductors, a senior manager once said, it's a slightly strange term, but quite insightful. He said, a roadmap is a dirty mirror. And he said, if you hold it up and don't like what you see, sort it out, don't blame the messenger.
Very eloquently expressed. Very eloquently expressed. Rob, this takes me to kind of another thought, if you will, as you experience, if you will, the work that you do with industry and academia and what have you, and integrate these different pieces. What are you seeing as really the top challenges for us to confront, if you will, relative to the technique and the wisdom that it provides?
Okay, I just touch on that point I made earlier, that the best solution is to have really a design spectrum from pure human to pure analysis. And, that'll change over time as AI gets better and so on. We need to experiment with trying to move around on that spectrum. And sometimes, just an expert discussion is fine. But over time, I think how we can blend the sort of cyber-human process is going to be a big challenge and an opportunity as well. And not just for road mapping, but many other things as well. So I think that's a major research agenda. But the other point, I think, which is really interesting is maybe touches on that point of confusing it with strategy, and it's such a good diagnostic, is that you don't often see road mapping systems deployed at scale. What you tend to find in big firms are pockets of road mapping where people are just working within the scope of their control, and just joining them up is great as a community practice. Now, part of the reason might be that many senior managers don't really know of the technique because it's not in the sort of main educational programs, or if they've seen it, they'll see it in one application and not understand the general capability of the method. And of course, to have a great roadmap across a set of roadmaps across the business means you've sorted all of your organizational and strategic issues out, and that can take years of course. So you're touching on all sorts of power brokers and changing managers, and it's quite hard to overcome. It takes years, to deploy a system at scale. It's a quality, continuous improvement thing. I'm working with a Japanese company, and they're 6 years in, and they know they've got a long way to go. That consistency. But the other thing, there are some intrinsic features, right, of road mapping that are not like the politics and outside of the technique itself. And that, I think, the key is, and it's not that well understood, although we have ideas, is the complexity of the knowledge network in the roadmaps can get out of control incredibly quickly, and software doesn't help you with that. It make it worse. Everyone typing, not talking. So I do think, and I've been working on it the last couple of years with a software guy locally in Cambridge, we think we can apply some rules of thumb as to how you build the knowledge. It's a knowledge graph, actually, to minimize complexity of that knowledge. And not to allow the complexity to explode by connecting everything to everything. You basically localize and modularize the information structures. So I think that's an issue that people have to deal with if they're going to scale this up into a corporate setting, which people can see the vision, but struggle to get there. I remember somebody from who used to work at ASML, the semiconductor lithography company, where road mapping is widespread. He said, think big, act small.
Yeah.
And you can get quick wins and be on that journey, but people overstretch themselves sometimes because they can see they can find synergies and sort out all sorts of organizational problems and opportunities that are beyond the scope of roadmap.
Very, very well expressed. So, and definitively one, and I love the way that you described the dirty mirror, if you will. The objective isn't necessarily to clean the mirror, but rather to work with the dirtiness as we go through our own evolution, to be very blunt about it.
Yep. Yeah, it's an incredibly revealing process, and it really pays to iterate fast to start with. It takes a lot of risk out.
Yeah.
It's usually used in a problem-solving mode. If you can solve a technical problem, quick win, and people buy into that longer journey. But the diagnostic capability is astounding because it just very quickly reveals the state of your knowledge, what you know, where the gaps are, the white spaces. The question marks are the most valuable outputs from the first iteration. And then you know what to do next. You need to start improving the quality of that information, and you understand why. So it really helps to target the sort of intelligence and analysis that follows. And then over time you'd iterate and it'll stabilize, and for incremental deployment anyway.
Definitively. And Rob, one question that I ask, and I'll phrase it in a particular way, because it is so revealing and it's so integrative and brings so many things to the surface. The question that often I'm asked is, maybe our organization, literally they'll say it this way, maybe our organization doesn't have the courage to use such a powerful instrument.
I think that's, if you think of deployment of a tool, you've always got to think of people's perceptions and the impact on them, and their role. And there will be barriers, and you should, work on that alongside. But I've generally found that people are very receptive to the open communication that can arise, where their voice can be heard, especially with the power of the Post-it note. Yeah. And so I think it's a great tool for cultural change, really, as well, which is not usually the main focus, but it's a real barrier to making progress anyway. So, but yeah, you need to be aware this is deployed in a human system, and people come with all of their, biases and preferences and so on.
Most definitely, and exactly. Let's take it further. What I say to them is, leveraging it as a tool, we gain the courage because we integrate it with other things. We integrate perspectives, and then we deal with the the dirtiness, the challenges that it helps magnify for us.
I think so. So if it's probably a bit self-selecting, the organizations who want to work with us, because they know what our approach is, and they are quite open and flat and value the communication, and the knowledge is at the fingertips. If there's any barrier to communication, these workshops are terrible. The post-production goes way down. And so, I don't want to be standing in front of that workshop. So I try to, make sure we have those conversations before. But I'm pretty sure that if we randomly pick companies, we would find a lot more barriers because of those issues that some people don't want to be visible. And maybe some things shouldn't be. Skunk Works or some parts of the portfolio need to be protected. I was working with a large aerospace company who had a major technology that we all have in our phones and so on. But they were talking about the gestation of that in the R&D lab. And what they said, it took 9 years. And they said it survived multiple efforts by managers to kill it off. But the technologists knew it was valuable, but it didn't fit in the short-term cycles. And, then was a major change. So that's a real issue, I think, is for more awareness of technology intensive innovation, which is often a long game outside of software and electronics. Materials can take 15 years on average for new material to get from the lab into a car. And so we need to be patient for that part of the system. But many major changes we've seen, good ones and some bad ones, are technologically driven, technology push, as opposed to meeting latent needs that, was it Ford who said, if you ask his customers, they'd have a faster horse.
Exactly. And definitively the value and the insights and the awareness of it allows us to make decisions and take actions exactly as you mentioned.
Yeah, and the synchronization issue becomes much clearer because all of those different layers will have their own clock speeds. Yeah. And if you'd have to manage a fast clock speed like software electronics on a slower moving hardware platform, there are ways to do it. Platform strategies and the vehicles allow them, modular architectures and so on. And that can all become, if you can see it, you can manage it.
Yeah, a tremendous tool all around. My good friend, where do you see it going? Where do you see road mapping evolving, kind of as you look forward, call it 5 years, 10 years, as we move forward?
Well, I think that apart from those two main issues of dealing with how to combine quantitative, qualitative side of human moving forward, and with software moving so fast, that's a constant experimentation, really. And this issue of how to scale up appropriately in organizations. I think that I think many of the fundamentals have been addressed now, and many applications that could be done, of course, and a lot of papers are an application in different sectors and so on. I guess it's really about that propagation of the method. We need to get it into the business schools, take the technology out, put business models in or something. And, if we can get the understanding of the technique into those teaching programs, the thing will really grow faster. And also, I've noticed very interesting how these methods propagate across sectors. So started in high-tech manufacturing, and you get early adopters, for example, from healthcare, who can make the intuitive leap that although we're not like a manufacturing firm, maybe with adaptation, that method could be applied, and it certainly can. And then you get the exemplar in that sector, and it sort of takes off. So I think that sort of evolution of the technique would be accelerated by getting it into business training. But that will still takes time for things to propagate across sectors. So my main ambition for the technique is to sort of deliver what it can. Because of this rather, sort of ignoring it in mainstream.
Definitely. I think you said it really, really well. The fundamentals are there, and they're very, very solid. And it's the application through both the tooling and the human element, as well as the scale, etc. Rob, as respectfully as you zoom out on the journey that you've been on, and you've seen others go on this journey, what would you say has been kind of the most surprising or insightful thing that you've observed as you look at that span?
For my own personal interest, my understanding of management tools has increased a lot, and our understanding of road mapping and so on. But the real thing that gives me pleasure, I guess, is when I see it used, and because we have a little consulting business in a technology transfer, knowledge transfer business to help disseminate and have impact from research, and to see it being used and actually, a key part of that is the transfer of knowledge, right? It does make money as a byproduct, which funds my contract and research, but it's not its prime purpose. A great job for us is to minimize hours to maximize transfer. So, teaching people to fish and then see them taking it on and deploying it, and of course, customizing and becoming much more proficient in their context is very satisfying all around the world. And so, that's really the mission of the university, is to make a difference. And in this technique, it's can do a lot more, but also we're not too protective about it. That's not the point. And so that's really satisfying. And I've got my little website. It's again a knowledge transfer. Templates we design, please use them. It's fun to engage with industry and other organizations, charities, and to help through the deployment of a useful tool.
Very much so. There's actually two comments, respectfully, the two major consistent comments that I get when I point people to CambridgeRoadMapping.net and your website. They're amazed as to how much you share. So, I don't know if they've mentioned this. They're just absolutely, they said the man puts all that out there for everyone.
Yeah, but that's a philosophical point that, there's that saying that knowledge is power. Now, many people, and maybe it's true in some cases, think hoarding knowledge is power, but actually sharing knowledge is power in many ways. And the world's a big place. There's plenty for me, and that's a philosophy, and I think it works for me anyway.
And it's quite honestly, it speaks tremendous to your character, to be very blunt about it, because they're overwhelmed with what you share. And then the next piece I always get is the website is so elegant. It's actually very, very elegant, and they use that word wrong. So.
Well, I have Squarespace to thank for that. What amazed me when I developed that was how advanced web platforms have become. It's my preferred publishing route now because they handle. Okay, I do like visually. I've got an eye for visual, and I'm a photographer and so on. But I did use a photographic template, and I have plenty of photographs. But they sorted out the beauty, and it's so super simple and quite cheap actually. So I was amazed, and that was a key thing, I think, too, that encouraged me to continue with that path, the simplicity of adding more content.
Wonderful, wonderful. And I know my good friend, I know next month, if you will, we're going to be talking about leveraging the instrument in a very particular way around uncertainty and navigating the world around us. I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but, so kind of respecting the fundamentals of this conversation, any sort of closing thoughts, any last pieces of wisdom relative to the fundamentals that you've shared with us, Rob?
So that presentation, I mean, this hasn't been a presentation. I've just shown you two slides. You'll see maybe both of those in a wider set. So it'll have more content that's sort of easier to transmit. I guess the message I always have is, techniques like this can look a bit daunting. And sometimes if you ask a consultant, all problems are big problems, that can be a bit of a barrier. But literally, some of those templates on my website, print them out, get 2 or 3 colleagues together, have a conversation, and an hour and a half you can work out if it fits for you and if you want to take it forward. So have a go, basically, because it's actually quite a simple framework that allows you to deal with complex, ambiguous, uncertain things, and you can test it out with low risk, low effort.
Very well said. And Rob, it would behoove me to mention that I have 2 colleagues, actually, Brad Barton and Mark Ferraro. We stand on the shoulders of giants, and you are indeed one of those pillar giants, my friend. And exactly to your point, we start with a napkin. Let's talk about road mapping from a napkin and then go from there. So words of wisdom. Thank you, Rob.
My pleasure. I'm standing on other shoulders of giants too, especially in Cambridge. I mean, it's a privilege. The Darwin, Newton, you name it, they've been here, and it's it gives us a huge privilege, and we've got to live up to it as best we can.
Very, very well said. And likewise, the humanity that you bring forward, exactly in the way that you just demonstrated, goes such a long way. So thank you so much for making the time, Rob, to join us today, and we look forward to next month where we'll get even more deep and more specific. And by all means, I really encourage folks to really go to CambridgeRoadMapping.net and learn more and leverage what you can. And thank you again, Rob.
Well, thanks for the opportunity to share some thoughts. That's great.
Tremendously appreciated, my friend. Thank you for those that have joined us. Likewise, those that will be listening to the recording. And by all means, the next conversation will get deeper with Rob, and we'll definitely have a lot more to take in. So thank you all around.
Bye.
Bye-bye.